Hello, I'm Georgina Rose, and welcome back to the Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss everything related to magic, mysticism, religion, and everything on the fringes of esoterica. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about basically a list of oddly specific mistakes people make within their occult practice. This is within ritual, within mysticism. And in the past, and it's a couple years old now, I made a video called The Most Dangerous Occult Mistakes. And those are really like the big errors, right? Those are like the mainstream ones that you can think of, like, okay, yeah, that's really what's going to cause negative results. But I've not actually made a video where I've talked about like basically the more common stuff and the more specific stuff. Because people make a lot of different mistakes when they get into occultism. And some of them are not really ones you're going to think of. And these are things that either I have done or people I personally know have done multiple times. Some of them to the point where they're almost like a meme with like the in real life occultist I know. So yeah, these are some big, oddly specific mistakes. Now, a lot of them are not the things that are going to ruin your practice forever, but you really do need to avoid making these mistakes because they will really disrupt your ritual and cause more negative effects than you would think. And a lot of these things are not something that you would think of if it wasn't brought up to you. So the first one is about what you bring into ritual. So within ritual, basically you are creating a microcosm. A microcosm is the as below equation of as above, so below. Basically, everything within our little ritual space is our cosmos, the thing that we are using to affect the big cosmos, the macrocosm, right? So every single thing brought into ritual is actually a correspondence. And a correspondence is something that represents something larger. Just like how Mars represents war and action, when Mars moves, that stuff happens in our lives. When we use red in a ritual, we are representing Mars. We're representing those principles of action, war, conflict, aggression. And so everything we bring in is a correspondence that goes into our microcosm. Every single thing, down to your incense and down to you. You are a correspondence too. And so a big mistake people make is they come into ritual with a really strong emotion, okay? And this happens to us all, right? I'm not saying like this only happens to people who have extreme dysregulation. I've done this, everyone I know has done this, right? Because sometimes you go throughout your day and you have a bad day, right? It could be something major, like maybe your friend gets really, really sick. Like that would obviously give you really strong emotions, but sometimes even minor things, right? We all have those days where every single thing goes wrong, right? We get cut off in traffic, the line at the grocery store is really, really long, we break our favorite mug, right? And all of those things compound. And they really enter our psyche. And so then when we go into ritual, to have our sacred time, to commune with the gods, that comes in with us. And so you really want to be in a good headspace when you do ritual, especially when you do major rituals like initiations and huge invocations, right? When you're doing your daily rituals, say like your lesser banishing ritual or the star ruby, maybe being in a little bit of a bad headspace isn't going to cause major effects. But if it's a big ritual, that emotion is now a correspondence. Like let's say you're mad because some old woman on the highway almost cut you off and drove you into the wall. Speaking from experience with that one, and you're just feeling horrible the rest of the day, right? You're angry, you're frustrated, and then you're like, okay, well, I think I'm good. That wasn't anything too major. Then you go into ritual, and that anger is now in that ritual, right? Everything you're trying to manifest, everything you're trying to achieve, every mystic interaction you're trying to experience is going to be colored by that anger, right? Everything counts. So before you go into ritual, it's really important to meditate. Of course, to increase your concentration and to sort of get you, ready, but it also is to sort of pull those emotions out. And I'm not ever advocating for emotional repression. You need to feel those feelings. But during ritual, especially during something like an initiation, it's just not the time. So make sure you sort of put that into a later tonight thing, because you obviously want to process your feelings. Never ignore your feelings. Always, explore them, or they will, of course, come to bite you. But it's really good to just be in a good headspace. And after all, one of the big Hermetic principles is to know thyself, and understanding your emotions and what makes you tick and really where you are, what your emotional baseline is a really important step of know thyself. Now, the next thing is something that I have done more times than I would like to admit, but I guess I'm admitting it now, and that is setting off your smoke alarm. So during ritual, we use a lot of burning things, right? We burn incense, we burn candles, and sometimes people are even burning things like paper or specific offerings, right? And basically, I can create a lot of smoke. If you live in a building with a smoke alarm, which I would hope all your buildings are up to code and you guys have smoke alarms in case something bad happens, that smoke alarm can go off. And that is very disrupting. If you are doing ritual and your smoke alarm starts going wee, 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 and then you have to stand on the chair and then whack it until it's quiet, right? Kind of kills the vibe, kind of kills the moment. So I would recommend paying attention to how much you're burning and just kind of keeping a mental note. I find that loose incense, not cone, just pure loose incense, sets off my smoke alarms the most. Even though it is my favorite incense, when I'm burning it, I don't use that much. I try to put less than I need into my sensor just to make sure I don't set off the alarm, because that alarm is going to be a real problem. Typically, stick incense and cone incense does not set off smoke alarms, but if it's one of those really nice stick incenses that are really covered in like the incense powder, that can also set off your smoke alarm. If you are burning paper, like let's say you're doing a ritual where you're writing intentions and then you're burning those intentions, or you're charging a sigil by burning it, first of all, your house will smell bad, but second of all, that is really likely to set off your smoke alarm, so I recommend doing that outside. Just in general, try not to set your smoke alarm off. That would just, not be great. But if it happens, just know you're human, just turn it off. It'll be fine. I have known some people who have done like permanent, basically disarming their smoke alarm permanently so that they can do rituals and this never happen. That is a horrible idea for your physical safety. Do not do that. Also, your landlord could get really, really upset with you. So just don't do that. Just don't overburn things to the extent where it sets your smoke alarm off. Now, my next tip is something that I thankfully have not done, but I know most people who have done this. So if you do ceremonial magic where you wear robes, specifically if you wear those towel robes that Thelemites and Hermeticists tend to wear, be careful where you're walking, because some of them have this like kind of drop sleeve, or like the sleeve is like, covers your arm, but also drops downwards. And some fashion clothing has that type of sleeve. But if it has that type of sleeve, really be careful where you're moving, because some people have basically like had this, dangling, and they're dealing with candles and they're moving around and they're doing, certain gestures, and they set their ritual sleeve, their robe sleeve on fire, right? And then suddenly you are on fire. Now, you can put that out, like you're not gonna like die probably, but just really be careful. If you have those like dangly sleeve type robes, watch where you're going, be careful. I personally don't love that type of robe, honestly, for this reason. It's also just kind of like difficult to move around. So just pay attention to your clothes. Don't set yourself on fire. Honestly, a lot of occult mistakes come from fire safety issues, because we use fire so much in ritual, and people are so focused on the ritual, right? They're not really focused on like the fire itself, that mistakes. More applies to people who are like more devotional in their orientation. That's mystics, that's pagans, really anyone who leaves offerings. And this is about offerings. So offerings are really important, right? Offerings are basically how we denote sacrifice. And it's a big way that we honor the gods and show our reverence. And you often need to do it. But often what people are using for their offerings is food or drink. This is very, very common. People will leave out, cakes or beer or bread or whatever, right? People use all sorts of food and drink offerings. And those are great offerings. Those are not, too little, or, you know what I mean? People get insecure about that. They're like, oh, well, it's not like, I don't know, like a golden box. I don't know who's ever given a golden box. I just tried to think of something elaborate, right? You don't need to give the most elaborate offerings in the world, right? Sometimes food and drink is good enough. Sometimes that last bit of your morning coffee is fine. But if you set out your food offerings somewhere that is not very obviously an offering, someone, including you, could eat or drink the food offering, okay? I have had people, talk about their roommates not realizing that that's an offering and eating it. I've had people eat it themselves, like kind of have like a brain fart moment where they're like, oh, yay, cookie. And then they've eaten their offering. Okay, don't do that. The way that you avoid that is you put your offerings in a specific place every time. I put my offerings on my altar, and on my altar, if I'm giving a small offering, I actually have like an offering bowl, where it's essentially this like pretty bowl that I put offerings in. Otherwise, I just put it over there. If you keep your offerings in one place, you are not going to do this. Now, you might still have like a moment where maybe this happens, but it's going to happen way less. If you're putting offerings in like random places all over your house, and if you're someone who does have a permanent altar, you might be prone to doing this. Just be really, really careful. I really suggest putting your offerings all in the same place. And if you are someone who does not have an altar, just like pick the same, like, even something weird, like put it somewhere where you wouldn't, like not on the kitchen table, right? Like on like a windowsill or a bookshelf, like somewhere that you're not going to mess it up and eat it. So just pay mind to that one. The next mistake relates to timing of your rituals. So as I mentioned, everything that goes into a ritual is a correspondence that then affects it. And one of those correspondences is time. Time itself is full of correspondences, whether it's the moon phase or, the transits or retrogrades. Basically, everything affects everything. So it's really important to be aware, at least vaguely, of the astrological events of the time. Now, you do not need to become a professional astrologer like I am. You don't need to study them all. You don't need to know everything. But you need to have like a vague idea. Like, and what I mean by that is like, know if Mercury is retrograding, know if there's an eclipse, right? You don't need to know everything. You don't need to know about the fixed stars or the lunar mansions, right? You just kind of need to know like a vague sense of what's going on. Because if you don't have a vague sense of going on, people can make some really critical errors. A common one is that people think that a lunar eclipse is a normal full or new moon, right? They make this error where they're like, oh, they don't know it's an eclipse, right? So they do like a manifestation ritual on an eclipse. And an eclipse is a really malefic event. An eclipse is all about taking away disruption, bad omens. So if you try to like manifest things on an eclipse, it's not going to work, right? But people will, if they don't know that correspondence is happening, they might just do their rituals as normal. So it's really important to have a vague watch. As well, like, just keeping that awareness is good. After all, learning and gnosis is a big part of, discovery and reaching our goals. So just know kind of what's going on. If you want to get really into it, you can learn about, planetary days, planetary hours, all the transits and explore astrology. But just like, rudimentarily know, if you're not interested in that, what's the moon phase? Are there any major events like eclipses? For the person who's not deep into astrology or planetary magic, that will probably suffice. But if you want to get into planetary magic, I definitely have some videos up about, planetary days and stuff like that on my channel that you can check out. The next one is certainly an embarrassing one, and it's one nobody wants to admit they have done. But I know people who have come to me having done this, so I know this happens. And that is not reading the full text of the ritual you are going to do before you do it. So often people will, read the name of a ritual and the description and just do it without having looked at it first. I really recommend when you're going to do a ritual, if you're going to do a ritual that someone else has created, to read it before you start. Think about it for a moment, discern if it aligns with your practice and your beliefs, and then after that point, proceed. In general, you should kind of know vaguely what's happening. Now, you don't need to know everything, right? You don't need to be able to name every single correspondence used in the ritual, right? That's not really necessary, but you should vaguely know what's happening, because if you go and do a ritual without having read the document first, you can get jump scared. I know people who have started reading rituals and then they've been like, oh my God, this is an evocation. I don't know how to do an evocation. Or they'll get to some point and it'll be like binding a spirit they don't believe is right to bind, or, just something that's really contrary to their beliefs. So really just take some time to read a ritual before you do it. Now, I do not subscribe to the idea that you need to memorize every ritual text that you use. Obviously, it's ideal if you have, say, if you're going to do the born list ritual, if you know the whole text by memory, but you don't need to know it by memory in order to, do the ritual and it works. So, I'm not saying you need to memorize everything, right? You can do it with it by your side. I mean, there's a reason why we have all these books, right? People, it's fine to be reading the invocation. It's fine. All of that's cool. You do not need to memorize the entire thing, but you do need to read it before you do it, just so you don't get jump scared, right? This is for your benefit that this is a piece of advice I'm giving. So the next piece of advice is about your grimoire, your book of shadows, your magical record, whatever you want to call it. So pretty much every tradition recommends or even requires that a student of that tradition keep basically a journal documenting what they've learned in their practices. And for a lot of people, this journal is basically just like a log of things they've been doing, right? They'll just print out the ritual they did and then glue it down, or they'll write down a summary or something like that. Typically they're not, super in depth. And I find a lot of people they make a kind of working notebook, and then they also have a really elaborate one that they're going to, give to their kids and their grandkids. It's like an heirloom grimoire, right? You can do this in a lot of different ways, right? There's no, 100% right or wrong way to do this. It's just important to keep notes. But one thing that I will say, and I will say I am going to give you a right or wrong way to do some things. So I guess I take back what I just said. When it comes to do it your own way, you can stylize it however you want. But one thing that should be in there is some sort of section or page to update it with your results and your synchronicities and your observations. So after a ritual, you really want to pay attention to everything that starts happening. Whether you have weird dreams, whether you start seeing, the same number again and again, whether you start getting signs, and what results it yields, right? You want to kind of keep a watch on everything happening after that ritual. And one thing that's really valuable is to leave space in your magical record, or whatever you want to call it, right, to just report what's happened and write down anything you notice. The way that I like to do it is I'll have on the right side, so I'll have a notebook, right, a two-side, a book shape, okay? There's this side and there's that side when it's open. You get what I'm saying? And I actually stole this from what we had to do in a science notebook when I was a teenager, because this is just so good for magic, where basically on the right side pages, I write what I've done. And then on the left side pages, I leave that always blank, so that then after the ritual, when I notice things, I write my observations on that left side, so that I have the ritual and then I have all the effects, so that I can really, evaluate it and contemplate on it to a greater extent than if I would have just written down the instructions of what I've done. Also, this is just a tip. You can print things. You do not need to hand write every single step of a ritual down. You can print it, you can staple it in, you can make a binder. I know some people prefer a binder method for their magical record. That works too, right? you don't need to handwrite everything. And you can keep one digitally, right? A digital book of shadows or a digital grimoire is fine. If you're going to do a digital version, say on a Google Drive or something, first of all, back that up on a flash drive in case, something horrible happens to your accounts, but also make a document for keeping, your observations and your records and your notes. Because one of the key sort of axioms and parts of a practice that you want is know thyself, which means contemplate. You need to be contemplating and considering all the effects of everything you're doing at all times. So really having those records makes that way easier for you. Next mistake is making random correspondence swaps that don't make sense. So the law of correspondence basically refers to how some things represent other things, like say Mars and red. That's a very easy one, right? There's so many. And if you look at texts like Liber 777, you see huge charts of correspondences. There's also Llewellyn's Complete Correspondences, which is another one of those huge charts, right? One of the biggest endeavors of mysticism has been to find all these connections, because if everything sort of relates and emanates, there are all these connections. And so seeking out these connections is a big part of metaphysics itself. And when we're in ritual, we want to consider these connections and make sure, like we have a chalice to represent the divine feminine and the element of water. We want an athame to represent will and action and the divine masculine, right? We want all these things there. And some people, don't have all the things you need, which, yeah, you're not going to have all the things you ever need. That's okay. Correspondence swaps are fine. I make correspondence swaps all the time, right? There are all sorts of things I don't have. And actually, if you have like a deck of tarot cards, you actually have everything you could ever need, right? When I was talking with Lon Milo Duquette, he actually talked about how when he travels, he often uses his Thoth tarot deck to create an entire elaborate temple, right? You can make those correspondence swaps. But what I'm telling you to watch out for is making wrong correspondence swaps, right? It's easy to make those mistakes and switch things up in a way that doesn't make sense. So if you are going to make correspondence swaps, whether that's with tarot or with a DIY method, right? Like if you don't have like a wand or an athame, you could like use a stick or like sharpen a stick on a tree. I guess if you have something to sharpen on the tree, you should probably just use the knife. For the athame, I've mentioned that when I was a new occultist, I used my hair cutting shears that I used for my bangs as my athame before I could get a real athame. Right, those substitutions are fine. They just need to make sense, because otherwise it's not the same correspondence and it doesn't really work. The worst offenders of these are when people rewrite the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram to be like paganized. There's a version of that exists. It's called the Star Ruby. Just do the Star Ruby if you want to paganize LBRP. But what happens is people just start swapping in random god names and they don't consider why each archangel is at each position, and it makes no sense, and the ritual kind of like becomes something else. Now, I'm not saying these rituals will like, make you get struck down by lightning or something. Like they probably will be, nice, but they're not the same ritual, right? And there are, correspondence swaps that could be like a real error. Like if you started using a chalice to represent like fire and the divine masculine, like that would make zero sense. So just know what you're doing with correspondence swaps, but also at the same time, don't be afraid of them, because really, like, realistically, if you do a bunch of rituals, you're probably not gonna have everything ever, and it's kind of like unrealistic to, try to acquire everything ever, you know what I mean? Like, do correspondence swaps within reason and just kind of know what you're doing, right? Know your ground. And that's why studying and continuing to learn is important, even once you're past that beginner phase. This one is the most oddly specific one and really only applies to our Western ceremonial magic people. If there is a name or writing in all caps in a ritual text, that means it needs to be vibrated most of the time. Now, there are some outliers, but this is a general formatting thing you see in Western esotericism, where like if you're doing, say, the Bornless ritual, right? Because the Bornless ritual has a lot of these. You'll see names like in all caps. In the Bornless ritual, they're barbarous names, so don't bother about pronouncing them right. They're barbarous, it's not going to happen. But regardless, whenever you see this, whether it's the Star Ruby, whether it's the Headless ritual, whether it's the Steel of Aeon, right? No matter what you're looking at, if it's Western, assume if it's in all caps, it's supposed to be vibrated. Sometimes they will mention in the text like, and vibrate, and then all caps writing. But if it's not noted, I would just go ahead and vibrate it, because vibrating something like that doesn't need to be vibrated will never really cause a negative effect, but missing a vibration will put less intention on things. Vibrating is basically, if you've ever heard people do that yoga thing where they go like, right? That's vibration. Your mouth kind of vibrates when you do it. Now, people vibrate in slightly different techniques. For some people, the way they vibrate is honestly kind of like singing. Some people bellow. Some people, it's really quiet and it's like, right? It can be a lot of things. You can vibrate however you want. As long as there is that vibration, your lips are vibrating and it's putting that extra intention. Because when you're not just speaking something, it has extra intention and extra effort put into it. So it's basically a way to concentrate the willpower around that specific name to give it more oomph. So you want to vibrate anything in all caps. If you're looking at things outside of the West, like say Tibetan Buddhist stuff, Ignore this rule. This is not a rule anywhere outside of Western esotericism, but within Western esotericism, just default to it. I default to it, and it's never really served me wrong. Now, the last thing is more ephemeral, and that is perfectionism. Don't be a perfectionist. Amongst people who do ceremonial magic, I see a lot of perfectionism. I see a lot of people who literally do not do rituals because they think they will do them imperfectly. This is perhaps not an oddly specific mistake, but it's one that doesn't get brought up a lot. You are going to make mistakes. I have made multiple of these mistakes within this video. The smoke alarm one is the one I am the biggest culprit of, right? Sometimes your focus will be broken. Sometimes you might even catch yourself on fire, right? Things happen. Rituals do not always go perfectly. Sometimes that's for divine reasons. Sometimes it's for user error. Sometimes we make mistakes. And we need to have like a reasonable expectation of what we can do and understanding of when these errors happen. It's okay. Don't freak out, because that freaking out is going to hold you back. This is like when I see people who want to do ceremonial magic, but they're like, I don't have a lion skin belt, so I'm not going to do it, right? That's perfectionism taken to a way that hurts you, right? Anyone can do ceremonial magic if they put in the effort and they really try. So don't, hold yourself back out of fear or a desire to be perfect, because you won't be perfect. This is the thing. It will never happen. No one is a perfect magician. It's not real. You make errors. You are a human being. So it's worth trying even if you might make mistakes. Now, you can avoid as many mistakes as possible, and you should. You should try as hard as you can, but you need to also be kind to yourself and compassionate to yourself and understand that, yeah, I'm going to try as hard as I can to be a good mystic, but I'm going to mess up, right? And that is the healthy mindset you need to adopt if you are going to be an occultist, right? Be nice to yourself. The gods know you are human and you are less than them and that you make mistakes, right? The gods have a reasonable expectation of you, so you need to have a reasonable expectation of yourself and know if any of these things happen or if any of them had. If you've made any of these mistakes, share it in the comments, right? Share your oddly specific mistakes, right? Tell other people what they shouldn't do too, because I think mistakes are an important way to learn. I think we should learn from each other, and I think we should humble ourselves and admit when we make mistakes more so that we can make sure people that we are helping don't make those same mistakes. So that's all I have to say. If you want to support me, I am .darling. This channel is supported by Patreon. You get a ritual guide every month, which is over 20 pages of rituals with step-by-step instructions that whether you're beginner or you're advanced could benefit you. They're based around, holidays and astrological events. I also give herbal preparations where I make custom herbal preparations that I ship to your house every month. You get a bonus video, so that's an extra YouTube video every single month. You get early access to all videos. If you're a high enough tier, you do get mentorship sessions with me monthly so that I can give you direct spiritual advice and help you develop your practice in the way that you want it to go. And I'm also a professional tarot reader and astrologer. My booking information will be in the description if you want to get a reading from me. And I host the podcast Pagan Perspectives. It's on this YouTube channel and it's under Pagan Perspectives by Georgina Rose on Spotify and all relevant podcasting platforms. Apple Podcast, for some reason hates me and never wants me to upload there. So it's not there, but it's most other places. Spotify is really my main podcasting home besides this YouTube channel. But of course, you can just listen here. You don't need to even leave this website or app wherever you're listening to this. I'm also a Substack writer. I post 2 articles a month on Substack. And I am on Twitter/X, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Threads. I'm really most platforms that the conversation is happening on. So yeah, comment, subscribe, and subscribe for 93 days. You will meet your holy guardian angel, and you'll never need to learn any oddly specific tips ever again. Bye!